The battlefield was a ruin of mud and screaming. The wind carried the stench of burning flesh, clotted blood, and churned earth, a storm of misery beneath a sky that boiled red with unnatural light. Guts swung the dragon slayer in a wide, murderous arc, the massive slab of iron cleaving through the bodies of twisted apostles that surged around him like waves of living nightmares. His breath came ragged, teeth bared in a snarl, black hair plastered to his sweat-soaked forehead. The brand burned upon his neck, an unholy beacon calling the damned to him. The monsters would not stop. They never stopped. Each abomination that fell was replaced by another, their deformed mouths howling blasphemous laughter. The ground shuddered beneath their numbers, slick with gore. Behind Guts, the tattered remnants of a village smoldered, its people already reduced to meat and memory. There was no victory here, only survival. Griffith. The name tore from his throat like a curse, a word that carried both hatred and despair. He could almost see him in the haze beyond the apostles, that calm, beautiful face untouched by the carnage he orchestrated. Always beyond reach, always just ahead. Guts's vision blurred, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of a rage that had no end. Then the world trembled in a way even he had never felt before. A strange silence cut through the chaos, like the breath held before a scream. The air grew cold and heavy, the light dimming until even the gore-slick battlefield seemed swallowed by shadow. Guts staggered, his grip tightening on the dragon slayer. The apostles howled in confusion, their forms flickering like warped reflections in shattered glass. A tearing sound split the heavens, no mere crack of stone or wood, but a ripping, vast and terrible. Guts looked up and saw the sky itself split open. A wound of darkness yawned above the battlefield, its edges glowing with sickly violet light. The sight clawed at his mind, something too immense, too alien to exist in his world. From the rift came a sound like 1,000 whispers, layered atop a single deafening scream. The apostles shrieked, recoiling in terror. Some tried to flee, but their bodies were caught in tendrils of unseen force, dragged upward toward the impossible void. They twisted and writhed, their flesh unraveling into streams of red mist as they were consumed. Even the air seemed to bend and shatter as reality was pulled inward. Guts planted his feet, roaring against the pull. The brand on his neck flared with unbearable heat, the pain like molten iron searing into bone. Blood ran from his nose and ears as he fought to keep hold of his weapon. The dragon slayer felt suddenly insignificant in his hands, a shard of mortal will clutched against the hunger of God. The voice came then, not a sound in the air, but a presence inside his skull. It was cold and infinite, neither male nor female, speaking in a language older than time. Chosen of slaughter, vessel of hate, come forth. Guts snarled, shaking his head. I don't belong to anyone, he spat, though the words were lost in the maelstrom. The ground cracked beneath him, stone and soil collapsing into a spiraling pit that led upward and downward at once. The remaining apostles were dragged screaming into the void, their cries swallowed in an instant. Guts staggered toward the edge, driven by fury rather than reason. If Griffith lay beyond that wound in the sky, if this was some path to reach him, then he would follow no matter the cost. He leapt. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No light, no sound, no body to move. Only thought, stretched thin across a gulf of madness. Colors beyond comprehension spun like dying stars, shapes vast and predatory moving just out of sight. He felt their gaze upon him, ancient, hungry, mocking. The brand seared like a beacon, drawing their attention. Guts's breath came ragged, though he had no lungs to fill, only will and rage. Then came the sensation of falling, hard and fast. He struck something solid, the impact driving the breath from his chest. Stone shattered beneath him, dust exploding outward. Guts coughed, struggling to rise. The air here was thick and metallic, filled with the acrid tang of ash and promethium. The sky above was no longer the familiar black of night, but a churning sea of smog and fire, lit by distant flashes of war. Around him lay ruins unlike any he had ever seen. Vast, angular structures of blackened metal and crumbling stone stretched into the haze, covered in strange symbols that radiated power. The scale was monstrous, as though giants had built a city only to see it ground to rubble beneath titanic feet. The silence broke with a sound unlike any he had known, a staccato burst, loud and sharp, followed by the guttural roar of alien voices. Shapes moved in the distance, humanoid, yet clad in armor that glimmered with dull bronze and iron. They carried weapons that spat fire and thunder. Guts rose to his feet, the dragon slayer dragging a furrow in the cracked ground. These were no apostles, no soldiers of his world, yet the threat was unmistakable. Their movements were precise, disciplined, like predators trained to kill without hesitation. The brand throbbed weakly as if confused, sensing only echoes of the damned in this strange place. Guts tightened his grip on the dragon slayer, his heart pounding. Wherever he was, whatever nightmare he had been cast into, one truth remained: everything before him was an enemy, until proven otherwise. The armored figures turned toward him. A harsh, mechanical voice barked in a language he did not understand. Then their weapons roared. Guts charged, roaring his defiance into the storm. The first blast tore the ground beside Guts, throwing shards of stone and ash into the air. He lowered his shoulder and kept charging, the dragon slayer dragging sparks as it scraped against the jagged ruin beneath his feet. The figures ahead moved in perfect, terrifying unison, their armor glinting dull gray through the haze. Their weapons unleashed another volley, each burst like a crack of thunder. Hot slugs tore past him, some striking his armor, others biting deep into the scarred flesh beneath. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his muscles straining as though every step were a war in itself. The last of the distance closed in a heartbeat. With a roar, Guts swung the dragon slayer. In a sweeping arc, the massive blade collided with one of the armored warriors, shearing through metal and flesh with an ear-splitting crunch. The soldier's body was hurled aside like a rag doll, shattered and unrecognizable. The others shouted something guttural and sharp, immediately reforming their line. These were not mindless beasts or apostles. They fought with trained precision. The closest lunged forward, weapon raised like a spear. Guts sidestepped, the motion fluid despite his bulk, and brought the dragon slayer down in a brutal overhead strike. The sheer force of the blow split the warrior in two, the weapon's immense weight embedding into the cracked stone beneath. He wrenched it free with a grunt, blood and ash spattering across his face. More figures were advancing now, their numbers far greater than he'd first seen. From the smug emerged towering machines on clanking, piston-driven limbs, their forms belching black smoke and steam. Atop them were banners bearing a two-headed eagle, its wings outstretched, painted in crimson and gold. The sight gave Guts pause, not from reverence, but from confusion. Even in this nightmare place, such symbols seemed to command awe. "Fall back," a voice thundered in the distance, this one clear, ringing above the chaos like a clarion call. It was followed by the rhythmic pounding of boots and a chorus of shouted responses. Through the haze came more soldiers, but these were different. Their armor was less ornate, their weapons simpler, stubby rifles that spat thin beams of searing red light. They moved as a tide of flesh and discipline, surrounding the earlier group and laying down withering fire. Caught between the two forces, Guts hesitated. He knew nothing of their conflict, only that both sides had weapons capable of tearing him apart. He backed toward a crumbled archway, his breaths heavy, the brand on his neck, now a mere dull throb. Its absence settled him. Here, there were no apostles, no demons from his cursed world. These creatures were something else entirely, yet the malice he felt was the same. The battle raged around him, growing louder by the moment. The air filled with acrid smoke and the metallic tang of blood. Explosions rattled the ground and the shrieks of the dying rose to join the storm. Through it all, one figure emerged, clad in flowing robes of red and white, carrying a tall staff crowned with the same two-headed eagle symbol. His face was lined with age and fury, his eyes burning with a fanatic's light. He strode toward Guts, without hesitation, even as the warriors around him fought and died. When he spoke, it was not to address the soldiers, but to proclaim his words to the sky itself. By his divine will we cast out the heretic. By his flame, we purge the unclean. His voice was raw with passion, carried on the smoke and fire. Guts bared his teeth, tightening his grip on the dragon slayer. The priest's gaze fell on him then, and for the first time, Guts saw fear break through the man's zeal. It lasted only a heartbeat before being replaced by conviction. "You," the priest hissed, pointing the staff at him, "abomination from the void, spawn of the great enemy, you will burn for your blasphemy." Guts didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear enough. He raised his blade in silent challenge. The priest's followers shouted and surged forward. Thin red beams lanced toward Guts, searing the air. He moved with raw, desperate strength, using shattered walls for cover, closing the distance one brutal step at a time. When he reached them, the dragon slayer's swing was a tidal wave of death. Bodies cleaved apart, armor torn like paper. The survivors faltered, some breaking rank in terror, but the priest did not retreat. Instead, he knelt amid the carnage, raising his staff high. His voice rose in a chant, guttural and ancient. Around them, the battlefield seemed to shift. The very air grew hotter, the shadows deeper. From the cracks in the earth came the smell of burning incense, and something fouler, sulfur decay, the whisper of unseen mouths. The brand on Guts' neck flared to life, searing pain shooting through him. His breath caught, this sensation he knew too well, the presence of things beyond mortal flesh. Yet these were not his apostles, nor the God Hand. These were different entities, their whispers cold and cruel. The priest's chant reached a crescendo, and a massive figure appeared within the smoke, a monstrous shape clad in spiked armor, its face a nightmare of horns and fangs. Guts' vision swam, memories of past battles colliding with the impossible reality before him. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming familiarity of rage. The priest screamed a final word and collapsed, spent. The towering figure roared, its voice shaking the ruins. Soldiers on both sides faltered, their battle forgotten in the presence of this new terror. Guts stepped forward, every muscle taut, the dragon slayer humming with anticipation. Whatever world this was, whatever war he had stumbled into, the truth remained the same. There was a beast before him, and beasts could be slain. As he prepared to charge, the monstrous figure turned its gaze upon him. Its eyes burned like coals, ancient and unblinking, and then, in a voice that was not a voice, but a tearing inside his mind, it spoke a single word, chose. Guts froze for a heartbeat, the word echoing through the chambers of his memory like a ghost. Then the creature lunged, and the battlefield dissolved into chaos once more. The creature's charge was a thunderclap, its massive frame shattering the cracked stone beneath its clawed feet. Guts met it head-on, the dragon slayer rising in a brutal upward swing. The blade connected with a sound like a cathedral bell struck by lightning, sparks and shards of bone exploding into the smoky air. The thing roared, a sound that rattled the very marrow in Guts' bones, and slammed a clawed fist into his side. The impact hurled him across the battlefield, his body smashing through a crumbling wall before he came to rest in a heap of dust and broken stone. Pain flared through him, white-hot and consuming, but he forced himself to rise. His breath rasped, his vision narrowing to a tunnel of crimson rage. The brand on his neck pulsed like a living wound, screaming warnings only he could hear. The voices that had whispered before were now a chorus, 1,000 unseen throats calling out from the void. They reveled in the bloodshed, in the clash of wills between mortal and monstrosity. The beast advanced, its armored limbs glistening with ichor, each step sinking deep into the ruined earth. Soldiers on both sides scattered before it, some breaking into panicked flight, others standing frozen as though the sheer weight of its presence had crushed their resolve. Through the haze, Guts caught glimpses of the robed priest, his face contorted in a rapture of devotion. The man knelt, arms raised, screaming praises to whatever dark god had answered his call. Guts spat blood and hefted the dragon slayer once more. He charged with a guttural roar, a primal sound that cut through the cacophony. The beast swung its clawed arm to intercept him, but Guts ducked low, sliding beneath the blow, and driving his sword upward with all the strength in his battered frame. The blade punched through the creature's abdomen, tearing through layers of armor and unnatural flesh. Black ichor spilled out, thick and steaming, coating Guts as the monster howled in fury.
With a wrenching motion, he ripped the blade free and swung again, this time severing one of the beast's limbs entirely. It toppled to one knee, its roar turning into a keening wail. Around them, the battlefield had grown eerily quiet, every soldier transfixed by the impossible sight. A lone, ragged warrior standing defiant against a nightmare-given form. The priest screamed in denial, rushing forward to strike at Guts with his staff. Guts barely spared him a glance before sweeping the dragon slayer in a wide arc. The priest was cleaved apart, his chant cut short in a spray of crimson mist. For a heartbeat, the silence held. Then the creature collapsed fully, its body dissolving into smoke and shadow that spiraled upward before being sucked back into the rent sky above. The unnatural light dimmed, leaving only the smog-choked dusk of the ruined city. Guts swayed where he stood, his chest heaving, his limbs trembled from exertion, every muscle screaming in protest. He planted the dragon slayer into the ground and leaned on it, glaring at the surrounding soldiers. They stared back, their expressions hidden behind visors and helmets, but their posture was unmistakable, awe mingled with fear. One of them, a tall figure clad in black armor etched with gold, stepped forward. His voice was filtered through a vox grill, deep and commanding. "In the name of the God Emperor," the figure intoned, "lay down your weapon." Guts did not understand the words, but the tone was clear enough. He shook his head slowly, tightening his grip on the dragon slayer. The soldiers raised their weapons as one, a dozen barrels leveled at his chest. The tension held for a breathless moment before another presence entered the scene. A new figure emerged from the haze, his armor more ornate, his bearing radiating authority. A symbol like a flaming skull gleamed upon his breastplate. The soldiers immediately lowered their weapons and dropped to one knee. The newcomer studied Guts in silence, his gaze sharp and assessing. Then he spoke, his voice measured and precise. Though Guts could not comprehend the language, the intent was unmistakable. Judgment. Guts growled low in his throat, lifting his blade. He had been judged too many times in his life, by kings, by demons, by gods themselves. He would not kneel for another. Before the standoff could ignite into bloodshed, a sound rose above them all, a low, sonorous chanting. Guts turned his head, and saw a group of robed figures approaching, carrying a massive banner depicting the two-headed eagle. Behind them came a towering machine like a walking fortress, its steps shaking the ground. Upon its hull were etched countless prayers and blessings, its weapons bristling like the spines of some colossal predator. The sight of it stirred the soldiers into reverent murmurs. Some bowed their heads, others traced symbols upon their chest. Guts felt none of their awe, only a prickling unease. This machine was not alive, yet it radiated a presence, as oppressive as any apostle. The robed figures encircled Guts, their voices rising in unison. The words were alien, but their fervor was unmistakable. They were invoking something, perhaps their emperor, this god they worshipped. The air thickened with incense and smoke, the scent mingling with the stench of blood and ash. One of the robed men stepped closer, his face gaunt and pale, eyes burning with fanatic light. He raised a small, intricate device, and pressed it against Guts' chest. The pain was immediate, searing through flesh and bone, and for a moment Guts thought his brand was being torn open anew. He staggered but did not fall, his glare unbroken. The priest-like figure gasped, retreating as though burned. He turned to the commander, and spoke urgently. Though Guts could not understand, he caught fragments, his own name replaced by words like daemon, warp and heresy. The commander's gaze hardened. He gestured sharply, and the soldiers moved in, weapons ready. Guts bared his teeth, raising the dragon slayer, his muscles coiled ready to strike, to carve his way through these zealots, and flee into the unknown ruins. But then, beyond the clash of wills, Guts felt something else. A pressure, unlike any he had ever known, descended upon the battlefield. It was vast, suffocating and terrible, like the weight of an entire world pressing down. The soldiers dropped to their knees, some weeping openly, others chanting through tears. Even the colossal machine bowed its massive frame. Guts alone remained standing, his body trembling under the invisible weight. In his mind he heard it, a voice not unlike the one from the void, but colder, grander, a presence that seemed to encompass all of creation. Kneel before the God Emperor. The words were not spoken, they were carved directly into his soul. Guts gritted his teeth, every scar and memory roaring in defiance. He had knelt for no king, no demon, no god, and he would not start now. He raised the Dragon Slayer high, a solitary black figure standing against the worshippers of a distant throne, and roared his challenge into the ash-choked sky. The moment stretched into eternity, a frozen tableau beneath the ash-choked sky. Guts stood defiant, his ragged form and titanic sword silhouetted against the haze, while hundreds knelt in submission to the unseen will that pressed upon the battlefield. The very air trembled with the weight of that presence, a suffocating pressure that threatened to crush him to his knees. His muscles screamed, his body ached from wounds both fresh and ancient, but still he refused to bow. The soldiers looked up in horror. Even without words, their expressions were clear. This defiance was blasphemy of the highest order. Some gasped prayers, others raised their weapons with trembling hands. The commander barked an order, his voice cutting through the reverent silence like a whip crack. In an instant, the kneeling troops surged to their feet, rifles raised, a line of red targeting beams converging on Guts' chest. He moved first. With a guttural roar, Guts charged into their midst, the Dragon Slayer a sweeping arc of death. The first soldier was bisected cleanly, his body flung aside as though weightless. The second had time to scream before the massive blade smashed through his torso, scattering armor and bone in a spray of blood. The others fired wildly, last bolts scorching the air, but Guts was already among them, too close for their discipline to matter. The battle became a maelstrom. Each swing of the Dragon Slayer tore men apart, their screams lost beneath the clash of steel and the roar of alien weapons. Blood soaked the ground, mixing with ash into a slick, dark slurry. Guts fought without thought, without hesitation. His world narrowed to the next enemy, the next strike. The brand on his neck throbbed with maddening intensity, reacting not to the creatures he knew, but to the raw tide of slaughter around him. A burst of fire slammed into his side, staggering him. Guts twisted, spotting one of the larger soldiers, a hulking figure, wielding a weapon like a small cannon. The man's armor bore the same two-headed eagle as the others, but it was heavier, reinforced, the mark of someone who killed for a living and expected to survive it. The soldier fired again, the weapon's deafening report shattering stone. Guts dove aside, the shot narrowly missing and blowing a crater into the ruins behind him. He rose in a surge of motion, and closed the distance before the gunner could reload. The Dragon Slayer came down with unstoppable force, smashing through the man's weapon, his armor and his body in one brutal blow. The corpse folded around the blade before sliding to the ground like a sack of wet meat. But for every soldier he felled, more emerged from the smoke. Their formations were tight, disciplined and relentless. Above the din, mechanical roars cut through the air as the towering walkers advanced, their limbs grinding with every step, their weapons ignited, spewing gouts of flame and streams of high-caliber rounds into the fray. Guts barely leapt clear as a wall of fire consumed the ground where he had stood moments before. The heat seared his skin, the acrid stench of burning flesh filling his lungs. He stumbled behind a fragment of shattered masonry, chest heaving. His breath came ragged, each inhale laced with ash. These enemies were unlike anything he had faced before. Apostles relied on brute strength and supernatural terror, but these soldiers were machines of war, precise and unyielding. Even Guts' raw ferocity was not enough to break them outright. A scream drew his attention. Beyond the chaos, he saw civilians, frail, unarmed figures, scrambling through the ruins. They were thin, hollow-eyed, clothed in rags. A woman clutched a child to her chest, her face streaked with soot and tears. They ran directly into the path of the advancing walker. The machine's flamethrowers ignited, casting a hellish glow over the rubble. Guts didn't think, he moved, his legs pumped with the strength of desperation, his boots pounding broken stone as he hurled himself forward. The woman tripped, the child slipping from her grasp. Just as the walker unleashed its fire, Guts slammed into them, scooping both up and diving behind a fallen pillar. Flame washed over the stone, heat blistering his back. He gritted his teeth and rolled to his feet, shoving the pair toward a gap in the ruins. They hesitated only a moment before fleeing, their terrified sobs lost in the storm of battle. The moment cost him. A heavy round struck his shoulder, spinning him sideways. The dragon slayer slipped from his grip, clanging against the ground. Guts snarled and staggered upright, only to find himself surrounded. A half-dozen soldiers encircled him, their weapons leveled. The commander stepped forward, his black and gold armor gleaming with ash and blood. His voice boomed through the vox grill, incomprehensible but commanding. The soldiers tightened their ring. This time, they did not hesitate. A volley of fire erupted, bolts of energy and mass-reactive rounds tore into Guts, blasting flesh and armor apart. He roared, a sound of pure defiance, and lunged toward the nearest soldier. Even as his body was torn by shot after shot, his hand closed around the dragon slayer's hilt. With a final surge of strength, he swung. The blade carved through 3 men in a single stroke, spraying gore across the others. Chaos erupted. Soldiers fell back shouting, their formation broken. Guts pressed the advantage, every strike fueled by fury. His wounds slowed him, blood running in dark rivers down his sides, but still he fought. Then, the ground itself shook. A deafening bellow split the air as one of the massive walkers turned its guns on him. Its weapons spun up with a mechanical whine. Guts had no time to dodge. The world exploded in fire and steel. When the smoke cleared, Guts was gone, buried beneath a heap of shattered stone and scorched bodies. The soldiers advanced cautiously, weapons raised. The commander gestured sharply, ordering them forward. A slab of rubble shifted, with a roar that drowned out the guns. Guts burst free, blood streaming from dozens of wounds. His armor was shattered, his body broken, but his grip on the dragon slayer was unyielding. The soldiers froze, stunned by his survival, and then, like the breaking of a dam, the chaos returned. Guts hurled himself into their midst once more, a black storm of rage and iron. As bolters roared and the ground ran red with blood, the world became a blur of fire, steel and blood. Guts was no longer certain where the battle ended, and where his own fury began. His limbs moved on instinct alone, swinging the dragon slayer in arcs so vast they seemed to cut through the very air. Each impact sent shockwaves through his body and tore his enemies apart, scattering armored limbs and broken weapons across the shattered ground. The smell of burning promethium mixed with the acrid stench of spilled entrails, a suffocating fog that clung to his skin and filled his lungs. But as his enemies fell and their screams faded beneath the constant roar of bolter fire, another sound began to seep through, a low, insidious murmur beneath the chaos. It was faint at first, like a memory half remembered, but it grew steadily louder until it coiled around his thoughts like a serpent. The brand on his neck burned with renewed fury, the pain so sharp it nearly drove him to his knees. He staggered, clutching at his neck with his free hand. Through the haze of pain, the murmurs became voices. They were many and yet one, shifting endlessly between whispers and screams. Some spoke in a language he could not comprehend, harsh and guttural. Others spoke in the familiar tongues of his own world, voices long dead and despised. He heard Casca's broken sobs, Griffith's smooth cold laughter, the guttural snarls of apostles he had slain, and beneath it all, deeper than any of those, was something far worse, the same alien presence he had felt when he first fell through the rift. It did not speak in words but in sensations, hunger, madness, endless yearning. It pressed against his mind like icy water, seeking cracks through which it could pour itself. The battlefield around him flickered. For an instant the ruined city dissolved into a vision of another place entirely. Towers of flesh and bone rose into a crimson sky, their surfaces writhing with countless eyes. Rivers of blood flowed between them, carrying the broken bodies of the damned. Shadows with too many limbs crawled along the walls, their shapes shifting with each heartbeat. Guts stood at the center of it all, his feet sinking into a living ground that pulsed like the belly of a dying beast. He roared in defiance, swinging the dragon slayer at the horrors, but the blade passed through them, as though they were smoke. Their whispers became laughter, sharp and mocking. Then he saw them, the god hand. They appeared not as they had before, but twisted and blurred, their forms refracted by this new, alien madness. Void's featureless face loomed impossibly large, lips moving in silent mockery. Slane's sensual figure was draped across a throne of writhing tendrils, her smile crueler than ever.
Conrad scuttled through the edges of sight like a bloated insect, while Ubik's tiny form hovered just beyond reach, his eyes glittering with malicious glee. And at their center, pristine and untouchable, stood Griffith. His white hair gleamed like silver under a blood-red sky, his pale face serene, beautiful and utterly inhuman. He reached out a hand toward Guts, and for an instant, the warrior was a child again, standing helpless beneath the weight of that gaze. "No," Guts growled, his voice breaking. He swung the dragon slayer with all his strength, the motion tearing through the vision like a ragged wound. The grotesque city dissolved, replaced once more by the battlefield, though the smoke now swirled in unnatural patterns, forming shapes that dissolved as soon as they were seen. The voices did not fade, they grew louder, more insistent, threading themselves through the clash of bolters and the screams of the dying. The soldiers around him seemed oblivious to them, but their movements had changed. Some fired wildly into the haze, eyes wide with terror. Others dropped their weapons entirely, clutching at their heads as if trying to rip the voices from their skulls. Guts realized then that he was not the only one hearing them. This place, wherever it was infested with the same unnatural corruption that had plagued his own world. These voices belonged to entities that lived beyond reality, feeding on madness and despair. He did not know their names, but he understood their nature. Chaos. The words slid into his mind unbidden, accompanied by a flood of images, entire worlds burning, seas of screaming faces, titans of metal and flesh, locked in eternal war. These creatures were not apostles, nor the God Hand, but they were kin to them, born of the same abyss. The realization stoked his fury. He would not be their pawn. He would not dance to the strings of yet another set of monsters. A piercing scream cut through the cacophony. Guts turned to see one of the towering walkers collapsing, its metal limbs buckling as fire consumed its core. From the wreckage emerged a figure unlike any he had seen before. The warrior's armor was black and crimson, adorned with symbols that seemed to writhe as he looked at them. His helmet was shaped like a snarling beast, and in his hands he carried a weapon that burned with unnatural flame. The voices surged at his arrival, no longer whispers but a chorus of ecstatic wails. Even the brand reacted violently, flaring so brightly that blood streamed down Guts's neck. The black-armored warrior pointed his weapon at the surrounding soldiers. With a single gesture, the voices seemed to pour into their minds. Men screamed, dropping to their knees, clutching at their skulls. Some turned their weapons on themselves, blowing their own heads apart. Others turned on their comrades, slaughtering each other in blind frenzy. Guts staggered, nearly overwhelmed by the psychic storm. Through the haze, the black warrior's gaze locked on him. Though his face was hidden, Guts felt the weight of that stare, cold and inexorable. "You," the voice hissed, not from the man's lips, but inside Guts's mind. "Marked one. You are ours by right." The words struck like a physical blow, dredging up every wound, every betrayal, every failure. Memories flooded him. Casca's blank eyes, Griffith's ascension, the band of the hawk dying screaming beneath the eclipse's crimson sky. For a heartbeat his knees buckled. Then rage surged through him, hotter than the pain, brighter than the madness. "No one owns me," Guts spat, his voice raw and guttural. The black warrior laughed, a sound like grinding metal. The voices rose in unison, howling with delight. And then, as if at some unseen signal, the battlefield erupted once more into chaos. Soldiers screamed, bolters roared, the ground split open, releasing gouts of flame and shadow. And in the heart of it all, Guts charged, his sword raised high, as the voices of the warp screamed his name. The ground split beneath Guts's boots as he hurled himself into the maelstrom, the dragon slayer rising and falling in a rhythm as old as his hatred. Each swing cleaved flesh, steel and madness alike, carving a path through the writhing mass of soldiers who had turned on one another under the psychic plague of the black-armored warrior's presence. The air was alive with screams, not merely of pain but of minds breaking. Last bolts and bolter fire cut through the haze, some finding their marks, others searing harmlessly past, as if guided by the chaotic will of the warp itself. The towering figure of black and crimson moved through it all with terrible grace, his weapon spitting arcs of emerald flame. Wherever he passed, reality seemed to warp and ripple. Men burst into flame without being touched, their shadows writhing as if they belonged to something else entirely. Guts locked eyes, or thought he did, with the faceless helm once more. The presence behind that mask was worse than any apostle he had faced, cold and calculating rather than merely monstrous. The voices swelled in Guts's skull, rising to a pitch that threatened to tear him apart from within. They whispered promises, offered vengeance, even dared to take the form of Griffith's voice. For a heartbeat he faltered, the dragon slayer hanging limp at his side. In that moment, the black warrior advanced, one clawed gauntlet reaching for him. But before the hand could close around Guts, a blinding spear of white light descended from the sky. The impact shattered stone and flesh alike, the concussion throwing Guts backward into the ruin. When the dust cleared, new figures stood amidst the devastation. Towering warriors, clad in ornate armor of deep crimson and burnished gold, their visors shaped like the faces of stern gods. Their arrival was accompanied by the unyielding sound of hymns, sung through vox amplifiers, their voices cold and absolute. The black warrior snarled, retreating into the shadows with his remaining followers. Reality seemed to tear open behind him, and in the blink of an eye, he was gone. The unnatural voices diminished, but did not disappear entirely, leaving a cold echo that gnawed at the edges of thought. Guts dragged himself to his feet, every bone aching. His body was a lattice of bruises, burns, and fresh wounds, but he stood tall, the dragon slayer resting across his shoulders. He watched warily as the new arrivals fanned out across the battlefield. Unlike the frenzied mob he had just fought, these soldiers moved with disciplined purpose, each step measured, each formation perfect. Their weapons were massive, their presence radiating a divine authority that even the other soldiers seemed to feel. One among them advanced, his armor etched with endless scripture, a halo-like device, projecting a faint field of golden light behind his head. In his hand he carried a sword that glowed with inner fire, and in his other, a weapon that resembled a cross between a firearm and a holy relic. When he spoke, the air vibrated with the sheer force of his voice. "Cease your heresy," he thundered, his words incomprehensible to Guts, yet clearly absolute. The surviving soldiers fell to their knees, some weeping, others bowing their heads in silence. Even the massive walkers lowered their weapons and sank into stillness, like beasts cowed before their master. Guts alone remained standing. The commander's visor turned toward him. A brief silence followed, then a single sharp order. Immediately, a dozen of the crimson giants moved to encircle Guts. Their weapons were leveled, each barrel glowing with restrained fury. Guts raised the dragon slayer in answer, his stance low and red. He did not understand their words, but he understood this moment. Judgment was being passed, and it would be death unless he fought. Before the circle could close, another presence entered the field. A figure in black and gold robes descended the steps of a shattered basilica, flanked by servitors, half man, half machine constructs carrying strange instruments. His face was gaunt and pale beneath a wide-brimmed hat, his eyes shadowed but burning with intellect and cold authority. At his belt hung a pistol, carved with holy symbols, and in his other hand, a staff capped with a golden seal. The crimson warriors parted at his approach, lowering their heads slightly in respect. Even the commander stepped back. This was a figure of power, greater even than these towering soldiers. The robed man studied Guts for a long, terrible moment. His gaze seemed to pierce flesh and bone,
weighing not only the body before him, but the soul within. Finally, he spoke in a voice that was calm yet absolute, like the blade of a guillotine falling. The words were foreign, but Guts understood the tone. The man was asking a question, demanding an explanation. Guts only tightened his grip on the Dragon Slayer. His silence was answer enough. The man gestured. A servitor shuffled forward, carrying a device that hummed with strange energy. It was pressed against Guts' chest before he could react. The pain was instant and excruciating, like fire driven deep into his very being. He roared, muscles bulging, nearly striking the machine apart, but the Crimson Warriors seized him in an iron grip. The device spat a series of tones and symbols that projected into the air. The robed man's expression darkened. He spoke again, this time with sharp finality. One word rang clear even through the language barrier. Daemon. The soldiers around Guts shifted, their weapons rising in perfect unison. He snarled, struggling against their hold, but even his monstrous strength could not break free. The Dragon Slayer was wrenched from his hands and cast aside. The robed man stepped closer, his gaze now one of disgust and pity. His staff lowered until its seal pressed against Guts' forehead. There was a hiss of searing heat, the smell of burning flesh. Guts gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. The voices of the warp stirred at this moment, surging back into his mind with renewed ferocity. They whispered of betrayal, of the futility of resistance. They urged him to accept their power, to unleash it and annihilate these self-righteous zealots. For a heartbeat, the temptation was almost overwhelming, but Guts remembered Griffith's hand reaching out, remembered the band of the Hawk screaming as they died beneath a crimson sky. He forced the voices down with a roar of sheer defiance, his own will a weapon against the abyss. The robed man, an inquisitor, though Guts did not know the word, staggered back in surprise. Around them, the soldiers faltered. For a single, fragile moment, no one moved. Then the Inquisitor raised his hand and gave a final command. The Crimson Warriors closed in, and the world exploded once more into fire and war. Guts tore himself free from the grip of the crimson armored giants, with a guttural roar, his muscles straining past their limits, veins bulging beneath torn, blood-soaked skin. The motion was sudden and violent, enough to send two of the warriors staggering backward. Bolter fire erupted instantly, deafening in its closeness. Explosions of searing pain tore through his body, as mass reactive rounds detonated against his flesh and armor. But he pushed forward, snatching the Dragon Slayer from where it lay embedded in broken stone. The blade came alive in his hands with a scream of iron and fury. He swung in a wide arc, cleaving through one of the towering warriors at the waist. The corpse fell in two separate halves, blood and machine oil spraying across the ruins. The other Crimson Warriors closed ranks with mechanical precision, chanting a litany of wrath through their vox grill. The Inquisitor's voice cut through the chaos, cold and sharp. He raised his staff high, and the chant shifted, the soldiers halting instantly, their weapons leveled but motionless. In that stillness, Guts breathed heavily, his chest heaving, his vision swimming with smoke and blood. The Inquisitor did not move closer, but his gaze felt like a blade. "Contain him," the Inquisitor commanded, his words foreign but his intent clear. Before they could act, a new sound split the battlefield, a deep, reverberating horn that seemed to rise from beneath the earth. The very air trembled, the ground quaking as cracks spider-webbed through the ruins. The ash-filled sky darkened, twisting into unnatural patterns. From the far horizon came a sight that froze even the Crimson Warriors in place. A tide of bodies emerged from the smoke, not a disciplined army but a horde, a living wave of madness. At their head strode figures in spiked armor, their banners stitched with symbols that writhed as though alive. Among them, something massive moved, a silhouette both angelic and monstrous, its wings blackened and torn, its crown of pale light gleaming like a false star. Guts' heart lurched. For an instant he saw Griffith standing there, Griffith as he had been, calm and perfect, the dream of a kingdom gleaming in his cold, beautiful eyes. But then the vision wavered, and what remained was wrong. The figure's features were blurred, its form shifting between angelic grace and demonic horror. Its voice carried across the battlefield, a single word spoken like a commandment, bow. The horde dropped to their knees in perfect unison. Even the distant air itself seemed to bend beneath the weight of that voice. The Crimson Warriors resisted, chanting louder, their prayers a wall of defiance against the encroaching darkness. The Inquisitor's face tightened, his eyes narrowing with recognition and dread. Guts stood unmoving, staring at the figure. The brand on his neck ignited, searing pain lancing through him. Blood ran down his shoulder as the scar split open anew. His breathing quickened, rage and confusion warring within him. Griffith, he snarled, the name tearing from his throat like a curse. The figure turned its head, as though hearing him even from this great distance. Its face flickered, and for a heartbeat, Guts saw Griffith clearly. The perfect calm, the cold serenity, the smile that had once promised salvation. Then the illusion shattered, replaced by a monstrous visage of horns, fangs and hollow eyes. The ground quaked as the horde began their advance. War cries and inhuman shrieks rose to the heavens. The black-armored figure Guts had fought before appeared at the forefront, his weapon blazing with unholy fire. Around him swarmed cultists and warriors, their flesh and armor merging into grotesque shapes that defied logic. The Crimson Warriors roared their own answer and charged. Their bolters thundered, each shot punching through multiple foes, tearing apart the first ranks of the horde. The battle crashed together like colliding storms, the clash of metal and flesh reverberating across the ruin. Guts charged as well, not toward safety, not toward the Crimson Warriors, but directly at the advancing tide. His mind had narrowed to a single point, a single truth. If that figure was Griffith, if that thing bore even a fragment of the man who had destroyed his world, then nothing else mattered. The Dragon Slayer swung, and bodies fell in heaps. Cultists screamed as they were cleaved apart, their blood sizzling where it touched the cursed blade. Even among the warped and the damned, Guts was a terror. But the enemy did not break. They surged endlessly forward, their madness feeding their strength, and above them, the false Griffith moved with deliberate, graceful steps, untouched by the chaos. His voice rose again, this time carrying across the entire battlefield. "Witness the dawn of the new order," he proclaimed. The words pressed into Guts' soul, like nails driven into bone. He stumbled, his vision swimming. The voices of the warp surged with renewed power, screaming in unison. He saw flashes of the past, Casca's broken gaze, the band of the Hawk dying beneath a crimson eclipse, his own hand reaching desperately for Griffith, as the world turned to hell. The illusion merged with reality, the false Griffith's wings unfurled, impossibly vast, blotting out the sickly light. In their shadow, the horde fought with fanatical fervor. The Inquisitor moved swiftly, his robes whipping in the storm of ash. He barked orders, and squads of Crimson Warriors fell back to form a defensive ring around him.
Strange devices were activated, humming with ancient power, their lights cutting through the oppressive darkness. He turned briefly toward Guts, his expression a mixture of fury and calculation. "You will face him," the Inquisitor said, though Guts could not understand the word. His tone, sharp and commanding, left no room for doubt. Guts spat blood, his grip tightening on the Dragon Slayer. "I was going to," he growled. The Inquisitor's hand rose, and for a fleeting instant, Guts felt something alien and terrible brush against his mind. A vision flooded his senses, entire worlds burning beneath the false Griffith's banner, legions of mortals chanting his name, and above it all, four shadowed figures watching with hunger and delight. The vision snapped away, leaving Guts gasping. The Inquisitor's voice was grim and final as he gave his last command. Across the battlefield, horns blared again, and the shadowed figure at the horde's head raised a hand. The advance halted for a single trembling heartbeat. With a cry that seemed to split reality itself, the two armies collided, and in the midst of it all, Guts sprinted forward, a solitary black sword raised against a false king. The clash of armies was a living storm. Bolters thundered, chain swords roared, and the earth trembled beneath the march of thousands. Guts drove himself forward through the chaos, a black silhouette cutting through the tide of cultists and corrupted warriors that surged around him. His dragon slayer was a constant motion of iron and death, cleaving bodies into ruinous heaps. Blood sprayed in great arcs, hot and metallic, mingling with the acrid smoke that hung over the battlefield like a shroud. Above it all, the false Griffith moved with unearthly calm. His figure seemed untouched by the carnage, his tattered wings unfurled like banners of a dark god. Every step he took seemed to pull the horde forward, as if their very souls were chained to his will. Their voices rose in a single wordless scream of devotion, an endless chant that drowned out reason. The crimson-armored warriors held their ground with machine-like discipline. Bolter fire cut swathes through the horde, each explosive round blasting apart multiple foes. Where their lines faltered, they advanced in lockstep, filling the gaps with unwavering precision. Through the haze, Guts saw them wielding their weapons with a religious fervor, every shot and strike accompanied by words of prayer. These men did not merely fight, they offered every act of slaughter as worship to their distant, unseen emperor. Behind their wall of fire, the Inquisitor stood tall upon a ruined plinth, his staff raised high. Strange banners snapped in the ash-laden wind, inscribed with sacred runes. His voice, amplified by hidden mechanisms, carried across the battlefield with the weight of absolute command. Though Guts could not understand the words, their intent was clear: rally, endure, destroy. As he fought, Guts noticed that the Crimson Warriors no longer attacked him directly. Their focus was entirely on the advancing horde. More than once, their covering fire struck enemies at his back rather than him. He realized then, with grim understanding, that he had been conscripted without consent. He was no longer merely a stranger here. He was being used, shaped into a weapon by forces that did not care whether he understood them. The ground quaked, and Guts turned to see vast machines rumbling into the fray. These walking fortresses were even greater than the ones he had faced before, their forms bristling with cannons and adorned with stained glass panels depicting two-headed eagles and haloed warriors. Their weapons unleashed storms of destruction, erasing entire ranks of the enemy in gouts of fire and molten metal. The cultists screamed in frenzied worship even as they were annihilated, hurling themselves into the slaughter with suicidal fervor. From the skies above came a new sound, like the tearing of the heavens. Sleek metal shapes descended through the clouds, their engines howling. They swept over the battlefield, dropping payloads that lit the world in firestorm. The blasts shook the ground so violently that even Guts was nearly thrown from his feet. Through it all, the false Griffith stood unmoved, his wings spreading wide. His voice rose above the storm, carried by no natural means. It was not heard by the ears but felt inside the skull, an intimate whisper of devotion and power. "You will not deny me," the voice coiled through Guts's mind, the words merging with the half-remembered tones of Griffith's own voice. "The world will kneel as it always was meant to." Guts roared in answer, his own voice raw and defiant. He leapt forward, swinging the dragon slayer in a blow meant to sever reality itself. The blade struck one of the false king's champions instead, a towering warrior clad in spiked armor. The impact shattered the champion's weapon and split him from shoulder to hip. Guts wrenched the blade free and kept moving, carving a path through the bodyguards. But each step toward the false Griffith seemed to take him no closer. The distance stretched, the world folding in on itself like a nightmare. Cultists swarmed endlessly, their bodies rising again even after being hacked apart, held together by sheer will and the warp's foul energy. Guts realized he was not merely fighting flesh, but belief, a tide of madness made real. Behind him the Inquisitor's voice rang out, louder than ever. He raised a relic high, its surface blazing with golden light. The Crimson Warriors responded with a roar, their chants intensifying. Columns of disciplined soldiers surged forward in perfect formation. Their banners were unfurled, catching the firelight, and the words they shouted cut through the oppressive dark like a blade. This was no longer a battle, it was a crusade. The sheer force of their advance pushed the enemy back step by step. Where Guts had been a solitary whirlwind of violence,
Now an entire army moved beside him, their discipline a weapon in its own right. Cannon fire shook the ruins, tanks ground the dead beneath their treads, and above it all, the Emperor's symbol gleamed like a sun defying the night. Guts did not fight for their cause, nor did he share their fate, but as he swung his sword, side by side with these zealots, he felt the momentum shift. For the first time since arriving in this nightmare world, he sensed the enemy faltering. The false Griffith raised his hand, and the battlefield froze for a heartbeat. The chant of his followers became a scream of rage. From the ground itself erupted new monstrosities, things that had once been men but were now little more than writhing masses of limbs and teeth. The tide surged forward anew, crashing against the Imperium's advance. The Inquisitor shouted a single word. At his command, reserves poured into the fight, more crimson warriors descending from the sky on wings of fire, fresh tanks thundering into the fray. The sound of their hymns rose to a deafening crescendo. Guts was caught between the two forces, a solitary black figure, amidst the sea of red and gold. He hacked and tore, his world narrowed to blood and motion. He did not care who lived or died, only that the figure at the center of it all would fall beneath his blade. Above the clash of armies, the Inquisitor's gaze swept across the battlefield. His expression was cold, calculating. Guts realized then that this crusade was not just about survival, it was a game of power, and he was a piece upon its board. The Inquisitor's voice rang out again, clear and commanding, and the crusade marched onward, into fire, darkness and ruin. The city of Saint Estera rose from the desolation like a relic of a forgotten age. Its spires were blackened by centuries of smoke and war, but beneath the soot and ash lay traces of ancient splendor, gilded statues, fractured mosaics, and the skeletal remains of bridges that once gleamed like threads of silver. Vast cathedral towers loomed over streets, choked with rubble, their stained glass long shattered, their bells silent for generations. The city was holy ground, and now it was the final bastion before the horde of the false Griffith. The Crusade's approach filled the horizon. Columns of Imperial tanks rumbled forward, their treads crushing broken stone, and the corpses of the fallen beneath their weight. Siege cannons were dragged by engines, the size of small fortresses, their barrels, blackened from endless fire. Regiments of soldiers marched in precise formations, banners snapping in the wind, their chants echoing across the blasted plains. Above them, aircraft streaked through a sky the color of old blood, their contrails scarring the heaven. The hymn of the God Emperor rose from thousands of throats, a relentless wall of sound meant to drive back despair. At the vanguard strode the crimson-armored warriors, each one a living icon of war. They marched without hesitation, their weapons held ready, their steps shaking the ground. Behind them, on a raised platform, carried by dozens of chanting acolytes, stood the Inquisitor. His staff glimmered with holy light, and his voice carried commands and blessings alike. He was both priest and general, weaving faith and strategy into a single, unbreakable whole. Guts marched amidst this tide of zealotry, though not as one of them. Chains bound his wrists, and a heavy iron collar was locked around his neck, connected to a length of chain held by two of the Crimson Warriors. The Dragon Slayer was strapped to his back, but its hilt was bound in seals of wax and scripture. He was not trusted, but neither was he discarded. The Inquisitor had made it clear without words, Guts would fight, or he would die where he stood. He stared ahead at the city, his single eye narrowing. Its walls were titanic, built not merely of stone, but of faith. Every surface was etched with symbols of devotion, every tower crowned with statues of saints and angels. Yet beneath its grandeur, Guts saw the signs of decay. Gaping holes had been blasted in the outer defenses, fires burned unchecked in the lower districts, and upon the walls, like a cancer spreading across flesh, hung the banners of the enemy. Their symbols shifted unnaturally as he watched, the designs never quite the same from one heartbeat to the next. The false Griffith's army was already there. The first shots were fired at dawn. The siege cannons roared, their shells soaring in graceful arcs before smashing into the city's outer walls. Stone exploded into dust and shrapnel, sending enemy defenders tumbling to their death. In reply, streams of green and purple fire lanced from the city's towers, striking tanks and soldiers alike. Men screamed as their flesh twisted and warped under the unnatural energy, their bodies becoming grotesque parodies of life, before they finally burst apart. Guts ripped free of his chains in the chaos. The Crimson Warriors holding him did not stop him, they merely adjusted their formation to cover his advance. The bindings on the Dragon Slayer snapped as he seized its hilt, tearing away the seals with a single motion. The battle became a storm.
The Imperials surged toward the shattered gates, their chants deafening, their weapons unrelenting. Guts charged beside them, carving a path through the enemy with every swing. Cultists hurled themselves at him in suicidal frenzy, their faces painted with the same shifting sigils that hung from the walls. His blade crushed them like insects, cleaving through bodies, armor, and weapons in a single stroke. A roar drew his gaze upward. One of the Crimson Warriors, a towering figure wielding a blade that glowed like molten gold, led a breach into the city. Guts followed, leaping over the ruins of the gate and into streets that had become rivers of blood. Inside Saint Estera, the scale of the slaughter was overwhelming. Narrow alleys became killing grounds, corpses stacked so high they formed barricades of flesh. The smell of rot and promethium filled every breath. Shrines and chapels that had once been places of worship were now defiled altars, their statues smeared with gore, their walls scrawled with blasphemous runes. Guts fought through it all, his mind stripped down to instinct. The Dragon Slayer never stopped moving. His path through the city was marked by ruin. Cultists split in half, corrupted beasts reduced to heaps of bone and sinew, and once human defenders of the false Griffith left scattered in grotesque poses of death. Yet for every foe he cut down, more emerged. From beneath the streets came twisted creatures with too many limbs and mouths, their forms barely holding together. From the upper towers leapt winged monstrosities whose screeches rattled the glass in the few windows left unbroken. The enemy was endless, and their madness unbound. At the heart of the city stood the grand cathedral of Saint Estera. Its spire pierced the clouds, glowing with sickly light. From its highest balcony, Guts saw him, the false Griffith, standing serene amid the chaos, his tattered wings spread wide. The sight drove him forward like a spear to the gut. He carved his way through the defenders with reckless fury, uncaring of wounds or exhaustion. The brand on his neck burned hotter with each step, guiding him like a cursed star. Behind him, the Crimson Warriors pressed the attack, their discipline shoring up the fraying Imperial lines. Above, the Inquisitor's commands rang out, uniting thousands of soldiers into a single unbreakable will. At last, they reached the cathedral steps. The false Griffith raised his hand. The world seemed to still as if even the smoke held its breath. Then a single word echoed in every mind: "Rise." The dead obeyed. Corpses shuddered and stood, their eyes glowing with unnatural light. The battlefield became a nightmare as friend and foe alike turned into puppets of the false king's will. For the first time, even the Crimson Warriors hesitated. Guts did not. With a roar that drowned out the chants and the screams, he hurled himself up the steps, the Dragon Slayer held high. The siege of Saint Estera had become something greater than a battle. It was no longer a question of victory or defeat, but of whose will would define reality itself. The steps of the grand cathedral shook beneath the weight of the dead as they clawed their way upward, their broken limbs snapping back into unnatural motion. The air was thick with the stench of decay and warp taint, every breath tasting of rot and iron. Guts moved through this tide like a storm given form, the Dragon Slayer a blur of iron and rage. Each swing obliterated corpses, severed limbs, and sent warp ichor spraying across the cathedral's blackened walls. But no matter how many he cut down, more rose to take their place. They came from the streets below, from the shattered houses, even from beneath cracked flagstones where bones had rested for centuries. Friend and foe alike answered the false Griffith's call. Soldiers Guts had fought beside moments earlier now lurched forward with empty eyes and slavering mouths, their bolters hanging uselessly from twisted hands. Behind him, the Crimson Warriors roared their litanies, their bolters unleashing cleansing fire into the horde. The disciplined rhythm of their volleys held the steps for a time, each explosive round shattering clusters of corpses before they could overwhelm the living. The Inquisitor's voice rang out above the tumult, carrying like a commandment of heaven. His words were incomprehensible to Guts, but their meaning was clear. Hold fast. Purge the heretic. Endure. Guts didn't need their faith. His purpose burned hotter than any sermon. His eye locked on the balcony above, where the false Griffith stood in perfect stillness amid the storm. The glow surrounding him was wrong, too pure and too cold, like moonlight cast upon a battlefield of nightmares. His tattered wings unfurled, each beat sending ripples through the warp-tainted air. For a heartbeat, Guts saw only Griffith. The man he had followed, trusted, hated. The man who had smiled as the band of the hawk died screaming beneath a crimson sky, his chest tightened, his breath catching. Then the illusion wavered. The figure's face split, not in motion but in essence. One moment it was Griffith's flawless, calm visage. The next a thing of horns and teeth, and hollow, bottomless eyes. The transition was seamless and horrifying, like a truth that the mind refused to hold. The voice that followed was not spoken aloud, but carved directly into the souls of all who heard it. Behold, it said, resonant and cold, the dawn of my reign. The dead screamed in unison, their voices blending into a single wail of worship. Cultists and corrupted warriors threw themselves to the ground in ecstasy, clawing at their own flesh in devotion. Even the Crimson Warriors faltered for the briefest instant, their chants faltering under the weight of the presence pressing down upon them. Guts felt the brand on his neck ignite, a searing agony that drove black spots across his vision. His knees buckled, the Dragon Slayer nearly slipping from his grip. Memories surged unbidden. The feast of the eclipse, the god hand's laughter, Casca's broken gaze. The past and present merged into one unending torment. The false Griffith spread his arms, his voice grew louder, filling every crack and corner of the ruined city. This world has knelt before tyrants who claim to be gods, he declared, his tone a mixture of reverence and mockery. Their throne is dust, their promises are ash. I bring a new order, a new truth. Through me, all will find purpose. The Inquisitor's retort came in a furious bellow. He thrust his staff high, its golden seal blazing with light. Symbols of the Emperor flared across the banners of the Crimson Warriors, their chants resumed with redoubled force, a defiant hymn of faith that clashed with the false Griffith's psychic proclamation. The air itself seemed to split. Between the two forces, reality wavered like a curtain in the wind. Shards of light and shadow tore free, revealing glimpses of other places, blasted wastelands, oceans of blood, spiraling towers of bone. Shapes moved in those half-seen realms, vast and predatory, their whispers adding to the madness. The false Griffith descended the steps with measured grace, the dead parting before him. He did not walk, he seemed to glide, untouched by stone or filth. As he came closer, Guts's breath grew ragged, every part of him screamed to lunge, to strike, to end it. But his body betrayed him. His muscles trembled, his wounds aching, the weight of the brand dragging him down. It was not fear but gravity itself that seemed to hold him back, as if the false king's very presence warped the world around him. Then, unexpectedly, the false Griffith spoke directly to him. The words were not shouted, they were a whisper inside Guts's skull, intimate and poisonous. "Still you fight me, Guts," it said. "Still you cling to that fragile defiance, even here in a world not your own. You cannot escape me." Guts snarled through gritted teeth, forcing himself upright. "I don't care what you are," he spat. "You'll die like the rest." The false Griffith's smile was both serene and cruel. "You cannot kill what is inevitable." With a single motion, he raised his hand. The dead surged forward in unison, their movements no longer shambling, but unnervingly precise. They climbed the steps like a tide, clawing at Guts and the Crimson Warriors. The battle devolved into a nightmare. Crimson-armored giants were dragged down beneath writhing masses of corpses, their armor cracking under the pressure. Bolters roared point-blank, reducing dozens of enemies to pulp, but still they came. Guts was swallowed by the tide, hands clawed at his face, his throat his weapon. Teeth sank into his arms, he bellowed in rage and swung wildly, his sword cleaving through dozens in a single strike. The steps ran slick with blood and bile.
Above the carnage, the false Griffith ascended the final stair to the cathedral's great doors, his wings spread wide, their light eclipsing the storm clouds. The Inquisitor's voice reached a fever pitch. He called upon his forces, his words burning with fury. "This is the test of faith," he roared. "Strike now or all is lost." The Crimson Warriors rallied. Their formation reformed, a living wall of devotion. They pushed upward step by bloody step, their chants thundering. Guts found himself at their head, not by choice but by inevitability, his blade clearing the way. The false Griffith turned at the threshold, his form fully revealed. He was Griffith, and he was not, a perfect angel and a pit-born monster in the same breath. "Rise," he commanded once more, and the cathedral itself obeyed. Its walls shifted, its statues twisted into living things, the very stones became extensions of his will. Guts felt the world tilt around him, but his grip on the Dragon Slayer only tightened. He would climb those steps, he would face this false king, and whether this was Griffith, or something worse, he would end it with his own 2 hands, or die trying. The cathedral shuddered like a living thing, its foundations groaning as stone twisted and warped into unnatural shape. Statues of saints and angels split apart, revealing writhing forms beneath, their faces melting into masks of agony. The great spire above the city cracked open, spilling a beam of violet light that tore into the sky like a spear. The clouds churned violently, spiraling into a vortex that reached beyond sight, and from it came a sound that was neither thunder nor wind, but a vast, collective whisper. Guts climbed the final steps, each one slick with gore, his boots sinking into the filth of countless corpses. The Dragon Slayer dragged behind him for a heartbeat, its weight magnified by exhaustion. Before he heaved it upright once more, his breath came ragged and raw, his body a map of wounds. Yet his eye burned with a singular, unrelenting focus. The false Griffith waited at the cathedral's threshold. His wings were no longer tattered but vast and terrible, each feather gleaming with pale light. They did not move like those of any living creature. Instead, they shifted as though made of countless blades, cutting the air itself. The figure stood serene amidst the chaos, untouched by the screaming dead, the bolt of fire, the collapsing world. His smile was tranquil, the calm at the heart of the storm. "Do you see it now, Gut?" The voice did not emerge from his lips, but bloomed inside Gutsing's mind, intimate and suffocating. "This is the truth of every world, order and chaos, faith and despair. They are only words, there is only will, and mine is infinite." Guts answered with a guttural roar and charged. The Dragon Slayer came down in a strike that would have split a tank in two. The false Griffith raised a single hand, the blade stopped inches from his face, held at bay by invisible force. Cracks spread through the stone beneath their feet from the strain. Gutsing's muscles bulged as he pushed harder, veins standing out beneath torn flesh, but the blade would not move. "Still you resist," the false Griffith whispered, his other hand extended, palm upward. "Come to me, cast aside this endless struggle, be more than a pawn of dying gods." The brand on Gutsy neck flared so violently that blood streamed down his back. The voices of the warp screamed within his skull, an unholy chorus urging him to surrender, to join, to bow. For an instant his grip faltered.
He saw visions, Casca's broken stare, the band of the Hawk laughing around a campfire, Rithith reaching for him with a hand both beautiful and monstrous. He roared through the pain and slammed his forehead into the false Griffith's face. The illusion shattered. The perfect, calm visage fractured into something inhuman, a skull wreathed in flame and shadow, eyes like burning suns. The backlash hurled them both apart. The cathedral floor split open, revealing a yawning chasm beneath. From its depths rose tendrils of raw chaos, coiling and twisting, their touch turning stone into flesh, flesh into smoke. The vortex above the city descended, merging with the rift below, until all of St. Astera was encircled in a storm of unreality.
Guts staggered to his feet.
Around him, the Crimson Warriors struggled to maintain their formation, their chants faltering beneath the psychic onslaught. The Inquisitor stood atop a fallen statue, his staff raised high, his voice booming with defiance. Circles of light spread from his position, holding back the storm by sheer force of will. "Contain it," he bellowed to his forces, though Guts heard only fragments of meaning. "Hold the line, for the Emperor, hold." The false Griffith rose effortlessly, wings spreading wide. Behind him, shapes emerged from the rift, daemons of impossible size, their bodies shifting with each blink of the eye. They crawled up the cathedral walls, howling praises to their master. One vast creature, its head a mass of gnashing mouths, clambered onto the steps, crushing both dead and living beneath its bulk. The battle devolved into madness. Bolter fire erupted in every direction, accompanied by the shrieks of chain swords and the hiss of flame. The air burned with the stink of promethium and scorched flesh. Men screamed not just from wounds but from their minds breaking under the sheer unreality pressing against them. Through it all, Guts pushed forward. He cut through cultists, daemons, and risen corpses alike, his path a straight line toward the false Griffith. The Dragon Slayer was an extension of his will, cleaving through limbs and stone pillars with equal ease. The ground shifted beneath him without warning. One moment he stood on shattered steps, the next he was plunging into a void of color and darkness. He struck a surface that wasn't stone or earth, but something alive, something that pulsed beneath his feet. Around him, reality twisted. The sky became a sea, the ground a shifting maze of teeth and eyes. The false Griffith hovered above, no longer bound by human shape. His form expanded, flowing outward until he seemed to fill the entire world. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, drowning out even the warp's scream. "This is the truth, Guts," he said, his tone both tender and cruel. "You fight because you are nothing else. But here you can be free. Strike me down, and you will only take my place." Guts spat blood, his breath ragged. "Then I'll kill you," he growled, "and anyone who comes after." He leapt, dragging the Dragon Slayer behind him. The blade carved a path through the warp storm itself, parting the unnatural darkness like a wound. Daemons shrieked as they were consumed by its passage. The false Griffith raised his hand to stop him, but this time, Guts's fury broke through. The blade struck, light and shadow exploded outward in a storm that consumed everything. When the brilliance faded, Guts lay sprawled on the remnants of a cathedral floor. The storm still raged, but its heart was broken. The false Griffith knelt before him, his form flickering between angel and monster. For the first time his voice wavered. "You cannot stop destiny." Guts rose slowly, his entire body screaming in agony. His grip on the Dragon Slayer was unrelenting. "Watch me," he snarled, and swung once more. The blow split the false king in two. The warp shrieked as its chosen vessel died. The storm howled, then began to collapse inward, pulling daemons and madness back into itself. The Crimson Warriors rallied, their chants rising to a victorious crescendo. But Guts felt no triumph. As the vortex consumed the last of the cathedral, he was dragged toward its heart. The Inquisitor shouted something, his voice lost beneath the storm. Chains of golden light erupted from his staff, wrapping around Guts, holding him back. For a moment the world was nothing but pressure and darkness. Then Guts was hurled through the collapsing rift, landing hard amidst the ruins of St. Astera. The storm was gone. The false Griffith was gone. Only silence remained. Guts staggered to his feet, his body broken but unbowed. He turned his gaze skyward, where faint remnants of the vortex still shimmered like fading embers. The battle was won, but the war, the endless war, had only just begun. The silence after the warp storm was wrong. It was not peace, but a hollow absence, like a void where sound should have been. The ruins of St. Astera lay in smoking heaps, its cathedral reduced to a cracked and blackened husk. Fires smoldered among toppled spires, casting long shadows that flickered and writhed, as if they still remembered the daemons that had danced upon their stones. The air was thick with the stench of burnt flesh, blood and promethium. Guts stood amidst it all, swaying on his feet. His armor was shattered, his body a lattice of open wounds and bruises, his breath ragged and uneven. The Dragon Slayer dragged against the broken ground behind him, its edge chipped and blackened from cutting through flesh,
not meant to exist in this reality. He stared at his own hands, sticky with dried blood, and felt nothing but a dull ache. The false Griffith's last words echoed through his mind. "You cannot stop destiny." They wound around his thoughts like a serpent, whispering that all his struggles had been meaningless, that every step he took only carried him closer to another eclipse, another betrayal. His muscles trembled, not from pain but from the weight of that memory, the band of the Hawk's screams, Casca's shattered mind, Griffith's cold smile. A rasping hiss of servos broke the stillness. Guts turned slowly, his single eye narrowed. The crimson-armored warriors emerged from the smoke, their formation unbroken despite the devastation. Their armor was scorched and battered, their once gold scripture blackened, but they moved with the same mechanical precision as before. Behind them came the Inquisitor, his black and gold robes untouched by ash, his staff glowing faintly as though fueled by his unshaken will. The soldiers fanned out around Guts, encircling him. The Inquisitor approached alone, his expression carved from stone, his voice cut through the stillness like a blade. Guts did not understand the words, but their meaning was clear. Judgment. He bared his teeth, the dragon slayer rising despite the agony in his limbs. If they wanted him to kneel, they would have to break him. He had knelt once before, and the price had been everything he loved. Never again. The Inquisitor gestured sharply. A servitor lumbered forward, its body a grotesque mix of metal and rotting flesh. It carried a device, etched with symbols that burned Guts' eyes to look upon. The moment the device activated, the brand on his neck erupted with pain so intense he dropped to one knee despite himself. Blood poured from the wound, soaking his tattered armor. The world twisted. Suddenly he was no longer standing in the ruins of Saint Astera, but in a realm without sky or ground. Colors bled into one another, forming shapes that were both vast and intimate. Voices whispered from every direction, some recognizable, others alien. He saw Casca reaching for him, only for her face to melt into a daemon's maw. He saw the band of the Hawk alive again, laughing and drinking, before they were devoured by fire. Griffith appeared before him, radiant and calm, and then became the false king, his wings tearing apart the world. Guts staggered, clutching his head, the dragon slayer slipping from his grasp. "No," he roared, his voice swallowed by the void. The whispers shifted, becoming one voice, smooth and cold. "You fight against the inevitable, you bleed and scream, but all paths lead here. Serve us, and the pain will end." Images surged before his eyes, a vision of himself clad in blackened armor, leading legions of daemons across a burning galaxy. His sword struck down worlds, his name feared even by the warp entities that whispered to him now. Power without end, vengeance without limit. For a heartbeat, the vision tempted him. Then he saw Casca again, her eyes blank, her mind broken, her voice lost. He saw the band of the Hawk as they truly were, dead, unremembered, betrayed. He saw Griffith's hand reaching out, delicate and perfect, offering him everything, and taking everything away. Rage roared through him like wildfire. "I am no one's pawn," Guts snarled. His voice shook the void. "Not gods, not demons, not you." He seized the dragon slayer once more. Its weight grounded him, its scarred edge an anchor against madness. With a primal roar he swung. The blade cleaved through the vision itself, and the warped landscape shattered like glass. Guts was back in the ruins, kneeling before the Inquisitor. The device sparked and went dark. The Crimson Warriors staggered slightly, their chant faltering as a shockwave of psychic backlash rippled outward. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. He studied Guts, his expression unreadable. Slowly he lowered his staff and spoke a single word. The soldiers did not execute Guts. Instead, they shackled him again, their chains heavy and cold. The Inquisitor's tone shifted, no longer condemning but commanding. Though Guts could not understand the language, he grasped the intent. The Inquisitor saw him not as a mere heretic, but as a weapon, dangerous, unpredictable, but too valuable to destroy. As they marched him through the shattered streets, Guts caught glimpses of what remained of Saint Estera. Survivors huddled in doorways, their faces hollow with grief. Cultists' corpses smoldered in piles where they had been burned. The spire of the cathedral was gone, leaving only a jagged wound in the skyline. The city was dead, but the Imperium claimed victory nonetheless. The columns stopped at a massive transport, a fortress of steel mounted on treads. As Guts was forced aboard, he glanced back at the battlefield. Through the haze he thought he saw movement, just for a moment, a silhouette with wings, standing atop the ruins, his hands clenched against his restraints. Whether it was Griffith or only a shadow, he could not tell, but he knew this war was far from over. Inside the transport, the Inquisitor took a seat upon a raised dais, his gaze never leaving Guts. The trial was not done, it had only begun. The transport rumbled through the broken streets of Saint Estera, its treads grinding bone and rubble into dust. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of oil and incense, mingled with the metallic tang of dried blood. Dim lumen lamps flickered along the ceiling, casting uneven light over the chamber's grim interior. Guts sat chained to a slab of blackened iron, his wrists and ankles bound by restraints etched with strange symbols that bit into his skin. Each movement made them tighten, their weight unnatural, as though they were forged, not only of metal but of will. Across from him sat the Inquisitor. His posture was rigid, his expression as cold and deliberate as the weapons mounted on the transport's hull. His staff rested beside him, the golden seal at its head, glowing faintly with a restrained power. Around them crimson-armored warriors stood silent and immovable, their presence oppressive. Even in the confined space, they radiated an aura of absolute purpose. The silence was a different kind of battlefield, one fought with stares and unspoken threats. Guts met the Inquisitor's gaze without flinching, his single eye burning with defiance. Though he could not understand their words, he understood the truth behind them. These people were as bound to their faith as he was to his rage. To them he was a weapon to be wielded or destroyed. The transport jolted violently, throwing Guts against his restraints. A low, distant boom followed, and the Crimson Warriors immediately shifted into battle readiness. One of them murmured into a vox unit, his voice metallic and cold. The Inquisitor's expression darkened, and he issued a single sharp command. The transport accelerated, its engines screaming. Through the narrow viewing slit above, Guts glimpsed the landscape beyond. The plains outside the city were a nightmare of churned mud and corpses. In the distance, fires burned where the remnants of the false Griffith's horde had fled. The warp storm was gone, but its echoes remained, unnatural lights flickering in the sky, the ground trembling without cause. The Inquisitor began to speak, his voice low but filled with iron. A servitor translated, its tone mechanical and precise. "You are a danger," droned, "a creature outside our understanding. By all rights, you should be destroyed." Guts said nothing. His breathing was steady, controlled, though his muscles coiled beneath his scarred skin. The Inquisitor's gaze did not waver. "But you fought the enemy, you bled for this victory, though you know nothing of the Emperor or the Imperium. That cannot be ignored." Guts let out a short, humorless breath, a sound closer to a growl than a laugh. "I didn't fight for you," he muttered, knowing they couldn't understand but needing to speak the truth. "I fought for me, for vengeance." The servitor continued as if he hadn't spoken. "You will serve now, bound by chains if necessary, guided by our will. There are greater wars yet to come." The weight of the words settled over him like a second set of restraints. Guts understood. Even without translation, they did not intend to free him. To them he was a beast they had captured, a tool to be pointed at their enemies, until it broke. The transport shuddered again. This time the sound was not distant. The Crimson Warriors moved to defensive positions. Bolters through the viewing slit. Guts saw shapes emerging from the smoke, figures in spiked armor, moving with terrible precision. Survivors of the false Griffith's army. Their banners were ragged, their symbols shifting like living things. The attack came suddenly. A blast struck the transport, tearing through its side and filling the chamber with fire and shrapnel. One Crimson Warrior was thrown against the wall, his armor cracking like a shell. Another fired through the breach, his bolter roaring. The Inquisitor remained seated, his expression unchanged, his hand extended slightly, and a shimmering field of light enveloped him. The shards of metal that would have struck him dissolved into harmless ash. The chains around Guts tightened, their runes glowing. He roared in defiance, and wrenched against them. The restraints bit deeper, drawing blood, but he refused to stop. The battle outside was his element, and being forced to sit helpless, while others fought, ignited a fury deeper than pain. The Inquisitor's gaze flicked toward him. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. In that silence, a wordless conversation passed between them. The Inquisitor needed his strength, Guts needed his freedom. With a curt motion, the Inquisitor touched his staff to the floor. The runes on Guts' chains dimmed, and the restraints snapped open. Guts surged to his feet like a released predator. He seized the Dragon Slayer from where it had been locked against the wall. The weight of the weapon felt right in his hands, grounding him in a way nothing else could. The Inquisitor spoke, again through the servitor. "Kill them. Prove that you are not our enemy." Guts didn't answer. Words were meaningless. He leapt through the breach into the open battlefield. The world outside was chaos. Cultists swarmed across the plains, their bodies twisted, and their mouths chanting in unison. Black-armored champions moved among them, their weapons glowing with warp energy. Overhead, the sky churned, as if ready to split open once more.
Guts plunged into the horde, his blade rising and falling in terrible rhythm. The Dragon Slayer cleaved through ranks of cultists, scattering bodies like straw. Bolter fire from the transport cut down those who slipped past him, the disciplined volleys of the Crimson Warriors blending with his raw, savage assault. In the midst of battle, Guts saw a familiar silhouette. One of the champions wore a helm crowned with a pale, gleaming crest. For an instant it looked like Griffith standing there serene and untouchable. The memory struck him like a blow. His vision swam with the mingled images of past and present, the band of the Hawk's banner fluttering in the wind, Griffith's calm voice promising a kingdom, and the false king's wings unfurling above a city of corpses. He roared and charged. The champion met him head-on, their clash shaking the ground. The Dragon Slayer smashed through the champion's weapon and body in a single unstoppable strike. When the corpse fell, Guts did not pause. He turned back toward the transport, his chest heaving. The cultists were retreating, their formation breaking. The Crimson Warriors advanced, cutting them down with merciless precision. From the transport's breach, the Inquisitor emerged. He surveyed the battlefield, then fixed his gaze on Guts. "You see now," the servitor translated. "You are part of this war, whether you wish it or not. Your chains are no longer of metal, but of purpose." Guts gripped the Dragon Slayer until his knuckles went white. Chains of purpose, chains of fate. He looked back at the battlefield, at the bodies of friend and foe alike, at the sky still trembling with the echoes of the warp. He had broken free of one destiny, only to be bound by another. The Inquisitor turned, his cloak billowing, and began to walk. Guts followed, his blade resting on his shoulder, each step heavier than the last. The chains were invisible now, but they were there, and he could feel them tightening with every breath. The wind howled through the hollow remains of Sant Astera, carrying with it the stench of charred flesh and the faint, unending whisper of the warp. The sky above was a bruised violet, thick with clouds that churned like a restless sea. Lightning crackled silently within them, casting the shattered cathedral spire in brief, sickly flashes of light. What had once been a monument to faith and hope now stood as a jagged ruin, its statues defiled, its walls twisted by warp energy. The Inquisitor's army had made camp at the cathedral's base, their crimson banners fluttering in the storm winds. Fires burned in carefully contained pits, casting long shadows across the broken street. Crimson-armored giants patrolled in rigid formations, their chants a steady, low thrum of defiance. There was no celebration here, no triumph. The air was heavy with anticipation, as though every soldier sensed that this was not the end, but merely the calm before the final storm. Guts sat apart from them, perched on the remnants of a collapsed statue. The dragon slayer rested across his knees, its blackened surface nicked and chipped from endless battle. His hands were raw and calloused, the skin split and crusted with blood, yet they still held the blade with unrelenting strength. His single eye stared into the storm above, unblinking. He had faced demons, apostles, gods that wore human faces, and now this endless war in a world not his own. No matter how many enemies he cut down, there was always another. Footsteps crunched through the rubble behind him. Guts didn't turn, but his grip on the sword tightened. The Inquisitor emerged from the shadows, flanked by two of the Crimson Warriors. His face was unreadable, a pale mask beneath the wide brim of his hat. He studied Guts for a long moment before speaking, his voice calm but edged with urgency. A servitor trailed behind, translating into the flat metallic tone Guts had come to despise. The enemy regroups, it droned. The false king's death was not the end. His followers have gathered within the cathedral ruins. They are calling something greater. Guts said nothing, though the muscles in his jaw tightened. His brand throbbed faintly, a warning beneath his skin. The war wasn't finished. It never was. The Inquisitor continued, "We cannot allow the ritual to be completed. If they succeed, the warp will flood this world entirely. You will lead the vanguard." Guts's lips curled into a humorless sneer. "Lead," he muttered under his breath. "Always lead." The servitor didn't translate. It didn't need to. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he understood anyway. Moments later, the army moved. The streets leading to the cathedral became a gauntlet of fire and blood. Cultists lurked in shattered buildings, hurling grenades and warp-born horrors from the shadows. Crimson warriors advanced in precise, unyielding lines, their bolters thundering in unison. Guts charged ahead of them all, a lone storm-given flesh. The dragon slayer smashed through barricades and bodies alike, its weight turning every strike into a massacre. The closer they drew to the cathedral, the more the world warped around them. The air grew heavy, thick with heat, and the stench of burning incense mingled with rot. Buildings shifted when unobserved, their walls crawling with blasphemous symbols. At times the streets seemed to stretch endlessly, only to snap back into place with bone-jarring suddenness. By the time they reached the plaza before the cathedral, the sky had split open. A gaping wound hung above the spire, pulsing with violet light. From it spilled tendrils of raw chaos, writhing and twisting like living things. The cultists below screamed in ecstasy, their bodies mutating as they offered themselves to the void. And there, at the center of it all, stood a figure draped in tattered wings of shadow and fire. For one impossible moment, Guts thought it was Griffith again. His chest clenched, his breath caught in his throat. But as the figure turned, its true form was revealed, a composite nightmare of bone, ash and stolen flesh, wearing the memory of Griffith's face like a mask. The brand on Guts' neck ignited, sending white-hot agony down his spine. This was no mere echo of the false king. This was the warp itself given form, a final insult to his unending rage. The Inquisitor shouted orders, his staff blazing with golden light. Crimson warriors formed a circle, their chants rising into a defiant hymn. Siege tanks rolled into position, their cannons unleashing volleys that tore through the ranks of cultists. The battle erupted with a fury unlike any before. Guts didn't wait for the plan to unfold. He charged straight into the enemy, his roar cutting through the hymns and screams alike. The dragon slayer fell like the hammer of a vengeful god, cleaving through the mutated defenders. Limbs, armor, and stone shattered beneath its weight. Blood sprayed in crimson arcs, mingling with the violet glow of the warp above. The creature at the center watched him approach, its mockery of Griffith's face twisting into a cruel smile. "You will never be free," it whispered, though its lips did not move. The words slithered directly into Guts' mind. "You were forged for this moment, as I was. Strike me down, and you only serve my purpose." Guts answered with another swing, his voice raw and primal. "I'll carve my own path." They clashed at the foot of the cathedral's shattered steps. The creature's wings lashed like whips, each strike strong enough to shatter marble pillars. Guts dodged and rolled, his blade biting deep into the abomination's warped flesh. The thing screamed, a sound like 1,000 voices wailing at once. Around them, the battle reached a crescendo. Crimson warriors fell by the dozen, dragged into the warp by tendrils of shadow. Cultists threw themselves into the fight with suicidal fervor, their twisted bodies forming a living wall to protect their master. Siege tanks exploded one after another, as warp fire rained from the sky. The Inquisitor stood at the heart of the Imperial line, his staff raised higher. Chains of golden light lashed out from its seal, binding the edges of the warp wound above. His voice rang out over the chaos, a single word repeated again and again, a name perhaps, or a prayer. Guts felt the ground shifting beneath him, the world threatening to collapse entirely. The creature reared back, its form distorting further as it drew strength from the rift. The Inquisitor's final command echoed through the din. The Crimson Warriors surged forward in one last, desperate charge. Guts saw his chance. With a roar that shook the ruins, he leapt, driving the Dragon Slayer deep into the creature's core. The blade cleaved through flesh, shadow, and warp-born essence alike. The abomination screamed, the sound tearing the sky apart. The rift above the cathedral imploded, dragging the creature and its followers into nothingness. The shockwave leveled the plaza, hurling soldiers and rubble in all directions. When the dust settled, Guts stood alone amid the wreckage, his body broken but his grip on the Dragon Slayer unyielding. The cathedral was gone, the enemy was gone, but the war was not. The Inquisitor approached slowly, his face as unreadable as ever. Behind him, the remnants of his army knelt in reverence or exhaustion. For a moment, there was silence. Then faintly, Guts heard it, the whisper of wings in the distance, too soft to be real. He tightened his grip on the Dragon Slayer, and stared into the storm-torn sky, knowing that this was not the end. It was only the last stand before the next battle began. The plaza lay in ruins, a wasteland of shattered stone and smoldering bodies. The great cathedral of Saint Astera was gone, nothing left but a fractured foundation, and a lingering haze of violet mist where the rift had collapsed. Fires guttered weakly amid the rubble, their light barely touching the broken banners of the dead. The storm overhead had begun to dissipate, yet the clouds remained heavy and bruised, like the sky itself was unwilling to forget what had occurred here. Guts stood amidst the destruction, swaying on his feet. His body was a ruin of torn flesh and shattered bone, every breath a ragged rasp that scraped his throat raw. The Dragon Slayer hung in his grip, its edge chipped and blackened, its weight familiar and crushing all at once. He stared at the blade as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. His eye burned with exhaustion, yet it never left the horizon. Behind him, the surviving Crimson Warriors formed into silent rank. Their armor was dented and scorched, their numbers thinned by half, but their discipline had not faltered. They stood like statues carved of blood and iron, their weapons held at rest but ready. The plaza was theirs now, claimed through unrelenting faith and sheer attrition. The Inquisitor approached through the haze, his staff planted firmly with each step. His black and gold robes were torn, the edges burned, yet his posture was unbroken. His face remained unreadable, his gaze sharp and unyielding. Around him, lesser priests and servitors hurried to enact rituals of purification, chanting prayers that mingled with the smell of incense and blood. When he reached Guts, he paused. For a long moment, they regarded one another in silence. The Inquisitor spoke at last, his voice carrying even through the tumult of rebuilding and mourning. A servitor translated his words, its mechanical tone devoid of emotion. "The enemy is banished," it said. "The rift is closed. The false king is destroyed. This world belongs once more to the Emperor's light." The words rang hollow to Guts. His brand still throbbed, faint but insistent, whispering that the darkness had not been defeated, only driven back. The war was not over. It never was. The Inquisitor's gaze shifted to the Dragon Slayer. "You," the servitor droned, "are an anomaly, a weapon forged in a place we do not know, wielded by hands that serve no master. You have fought as one of us, yet you stand apart. This cannot be allowed to continue." Guts's fingers tightened on the hilt of his sword, his muscles tensed, ready for a final confrontation. If they meant to destroy him now, he would not fall quietly.
But the Inquisitor did not raise his staff. Instead, he turned slightly, gesturing toward the plaza. At its center, a raised dais had been hastily constructed from rubble and the remains of shattered statues. Upon it stood a golden throne, old and cracked, salvaged from the ruins of the cathedral. Around it, soldiers knelt in reverence, their heads bowed. "This is not a seat of power," the servitor said, its voice echoing strangely in the ruined space. "It is a symbol, the Emperor's will made manifest. Every world must have its throne." The Inquisitor looked back to Guts. His tone shifted, growing heavier, more deliberate. "You have two paths before you: submit and serve the Imperium, be a sword wielded in the name of something greater than yourself, or stand alone and be destroyed as a threat to all." The words hung between them, sharp as any blade. Guts said nothing. His eye drifted to the throne, then to the sky beyond. He saw no salvation there, no promise of redemption, only another cage, gilded and eternal. He thought of the band of the hawk, of Casca's hollow gaze, of Griffith's perfect smile. Chains of fate, visible and invisible, wrapping around every soul he had ever known. His grip on the Dragon Slayer tightened, until his knuckles turned white. Slowly, deliberately, he raised the sword and drove its point into the broken stone at his feet. The sound echoed through the plaza, like a death knell. The Inquisitor's warriors shifted uneasily, their bolters rising. The Inquisitor himself did not move. "I fight for no throne," Guts rasped, his voice rough, but unbroken. The servitor hesitated, then translated. A ripple passed through the assembled soldiers, a mix of confusion and anger. The Inquisitor's expression remained unreadable. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The ash-laden wind stirred between them, carrying the faint scent of burned incense and dried blood. Then the Inquisitor gave a single precise gesture. The Crimson warriors lowered their weapons in perfect unison. "Very well," the servitor said. "You will not be forced to kneel, but understand this: you are bound to this war now, whether you wish it or not. Wherever you go, the enemy will follow. They have marked you, as surely as they have marked us." Guts retrieved the Dragon Slayer from the ground and slung it across his back. His body screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. He turned away from the throne, without another word. As he walked through the wreckage of Saint Estera, the soldiers parted to let him pass. Some watched with awe, others with fear. To them he was no longer merely a stranger, or even a weapon. He was a reminder that the Emperor's light could not banish all shadows, that there were forces even faith could not fully control. At the edge of the plaza, Guts paused. The sky above was clearing, the storm's remnants fading into a bleak, pale dawn. For the first time since the battle began, sunlight touched the ruins, glinting faintly off the shattered stones. He did not look back. The war would continue, on this world and countless others. Thrones would rise and fall, kings and false kings alike would claim dominion. But Guts would keep walking, his sword his only truth, his rage his only guide. Behind him, the Inquisitor watched, his expression hidden beneath his hat. He spoke softly, a single phrase not meant for translation. The servitor remained silent, and the meaning of those words was lost to all but him. Guts disappeared into the ruins, a lone figure, against the horizon, while the Imperium raised its banners once more. The chains of fate had tightened, but they had not broken him, not yet.